The Battle of Mindanao was fought by United States forces and allied Filipino guerrillas against the Japanese from the 10th of March to 15th of August 1945 at Mindanao Island in the Philippine Archipelago, in a series of actions officially designated as Operation Victor V, and part of the campaign for the liberation of the Philippines during World War II. The battle was waged to complete the recapture of the southernmost portions of the archipelago and secure them from remaining Japanese forces. Background: the campaign for Mindanao posed the greatest challenge for the liberating American forces, primarily for three reasons: the island's inhospitable geography, the extended Japanese defenses, and the strength and condition of the Japanese forces, which contained the significantly remaining concentration of combat troops in the Philippines. Like most of the Philippine Islands and other similar places the U.S. Army operated elsewhere in the Pacific, the geographical conditions of Mindanao, the second largest island in the Philippines, offered very little inspiration for soldiers who would have to fight there. It boasted a long and irregular coastline, the inland topography generally characterized as rugged and mountainous. Rainforests and numerous crocodile-infested rivers covered the terrain, the rest by either lake, swamp or grassland. These grassland regions, along with dense groves of abaca trees, source of hemp fiber, offer the worst obstacles which limit vision and sapping the strength of soldiers who would have to force their way through. The few roads in Mindanao further complicated the problem of movement. Two of these was the generously named Highway 1, which cuts across the southern portion of the island, from just south of Parang on Illana Bay in the west to Dijos on the Davao Gulf in the east and then north to Davao. The other, Sir Highway, the main north-south road, starts at Cabacan, midway between Illana Bay and Davao Gulf, then runs north through the mountains of Bukidnon and Makahala Bay on the northern coast. The strongest of the Japanese defenses were concentrated around the Davao Gulf area, which was heavily mined to counter an amphibious landing, and in Davao City, the island's largest and most important city. Artillery and anti-aircraft batteries extensively ringed the coastal shoreline defenses. Believing that the Americans would ultimately attack from Davao Gulf and also anticipating that they would be eventually driven from the city, the Japanese also prepared defensive bunkers inland behind its perimeter where they could retire and regroup, with the intention of prolonging the campaign as much as possible. Operation Victor V. On the 10th of March 1945, the U.S. 8th Army, under Lt. Gen. Robert L. Eichelberger, was formally ordered by Gen. Douglas MacArthur to clear the rest of Mindanao, with the start of Operation Victor V, with expectations that the campaign would take 4 months. Eichelberger had misgivings about the projected timetable for the operation, but nonetheless, his 8th Army staffers came up with a more effective plan. Instead of the expected headlong frontal assault on the Japanese defenses, the plan called for securing a beachhead at Illana Bay in the undefended west, then a drive eastward more than 100 miles through jungle and mountains to strike from the rear. The objective, which called for achieving surprise and pressing forward quickly and aggressively by the invading forces, deemed Eichelberger, could unhinge the Japanese both physically and psychologically. The key to the operation's success involved the beachhead performance of the landing force and the ability of the participating units to maintain the momentum of their attack, preempting Japanese reactions, and hopefully before the rainy season started, which would complicate movement in the island. Ground operations were assigned to 10th Corps under Maj. Gen. Franklin C. Sibert, with Maj. Gen. Roscoe B. Woodrouse 24th Infantry Division and Maj. Gen. Clarence A. Martin's 31st Infantry Division as principal combat units. Amphibious Task Group 78.2, under Rear Admiral Albert G. Noble, was tasked to carry the 24th Division and 10th Corps headquarters to the assault beaches near Malabang by the 17th of April to secure a forward airfield. 5 days later, the 31st Division was expected to be in Parang, 20 miles south, located near Highway 1, the route to Davao. Battle. Capture of Zamboanga and Sulu. On the same day, Eichelberger's forces were ordered to invade Mindanao. Remnants of Maj. Gen. Sam A. Duncan's 41st Infantry Division carried out Operation Victor IV, the seizure of Zamboanga, the large peninsula of Mindanao that extended to the southwest, which was concurrent with the recapture of Palawan, dubbed Operation Victor III. A sizable force, numbering about 8,900 men of Lt. Gen. Tokichi Hojo's 54th Japanese Independent Mixed Brigade, had established strong defensive positions around Zamboanga City at the southern tip of the peninsula. The slow construction of the airfield at Palawan posed a problem for tactical air support, augmenting the Zamboanga operation. With the seizure of a makeshift airstrip at Dippo Lodge, about 145 miles to the northeast of Zamboanga City, the Americans rapidly exploited the opportunity, airlifting 2 reinforced companies from the 21st Infantry Regiment, 24th Division to ensure control of the airstrip. Soon thereafter, Marine aircraft groups Zamboanga under Col. Clayton C. Jerome was flying sorties off the airstrip to cover naval bombardment and landing preparations off Zamboanga City. After bombings of the landing areas by the 13th Air Force and a 3-day bombardment by the U.S. Navy, the 162nd and 163rd Infantry Regiments landed 3 miles west of Zamboanga City at San Mateo. Japanese opposition to the landings were minimal, and the 41st Division troops quickly captured the city, which was decimated by the pre-invasion bombardments. The next day, the 11th of March, the Americans encountered strong resistance when they attacked Japanese positions in the hills overlooking the coastal plain. For 2 weeks, U.S. infantry, ably supported by Marine aviation and naval gunfire, fought the Japanese along a 5 miles front, in terrain so rugged that tanks could not be used, and in positions heavily fortified with deep earthen emplacements, barbed wire, minefields, and booby traps. On the 23rd of March, after heavy fighting, the center of the Japanese line finally broke, and in the next 3 days, the 162nd Infantry continued eliminating resistance in the central sector. The 186th Infantry, replacing the 163rd, continued the attack, and the 54th Japanese IMB was forced to pull out a week later, harried by guerrilla units, retreating through the peninsula and into the jungle. After some time, mopping up operations resulted in 220 Americans killed compared with 6,400 Japanese dead. Alongside the Zamboanga operation, smaller units of the 41st Division invaded the Sulu archipelago, a long stretch of islands reaching from the Zamboanga Peninsula to North Borneo. Rapidly taken in succession were Basilan, Malamaui, Tawi-Tawi, Sanga-Sanga and Bangayo. On the 15th of April, strong resistance at Jolo was encountered. Anchoring their stubborn defense around Mount Tahoe, some 3,750 Japanese troops held off the 163rd Infantry supported by Filipino guerrillas. By the 22nd of April, the Allies took the position after hard fighting, and the rest of the troops fled and held out in the west for another 2 months. The 163rd suffered 35 dead and 125 wounded by mid-June 1945, while some 2,000 Japanese perished. Siege of Malabang. As Rear Admiral Noble's TG-78.2 moved toward Illana Bay to prepare the landings at Parang, Col. Wendell Fertig, commander of guerrilla forces in Mindanao, sent word that his guerrillas owned Malabang and its airstrip. Starting on the 5th of April, Col. Jerome's Marine aviators from Dippo Lodge moved to the Malabang airstrip, and with target information from the guerrillas, proceeded to bomb the Japanese positions. By the 11th of April, the remaining Japanese forces fled toward Parang, and friendly forces were in complete control of Malabang. Sibert, Woodruff, and Noble realized an opportunity to speed up the initial penetration of central Mindanao and quickly changed their plans to take advantage of the new developments. The 24th Division would come ashore at Parang, much closer to Highway 1, thus speeding up the operation push to central Mindanao, while the Parang landings proceeded on the 17th of April and the 24th Division quickly heading inland. The 8th Army planners assumed correctly that the Japanese might destroy the bridges along Highway 1, and they decided to use the 533rd Engineer Boat and Shore Regiment, 3rd Engineer Special Brigade to exploit the Mindanao River. This waterway traversed roughly parallel to Highway 1 and was navigable for 35 miles. A small fleet of gunboats, led by Lt. Col. Roberto Amputs, sailed upriver and seized Cabacan and the junction of Highway 1 and Sir Highway on the 22nd of April. This startled the nearby Japanese garrisons, and they fled north and west. In turn, the Mindanao River became the main line of supply as troops and rations were disgorged far upriver. On the 22nd of April, the 31st Division waded ashore, with Marine Aircraft Group 24 arriving at Malabang to provide air support for Mindanao ground operations. With both divisions ashore and ahead of schedule, Gen. Sibert ordered the 24th to continue its advance up Highway 1 to Dijos, then seize Davao City. The 31st would follow to Cabacan and then attack north up Sir Highway toward Maccahala Bay. Tactically, the Japanese blundered in allowing the Americans to seize the key road junction of Cabacan so easily. The 30th and 100th Japanese divisions would be hopelessly separated with the American advance while allowing 10th Corps to build up momentum and ultimately lead to their destruction. That Japanese error was the direct result of the surprise achieved by Eichelberger's decision to land at Illana Bay, with Gen. Woodrough's 24th Division moving so rapidly. The Americans were almost on top of the Japanese around Davao before Gen. Morozumi learned too late that the western landing was in fact not diversionary. Upon reaching Dijos on the 27th of April, the Americans quickly overwhelmed the defending Japanese, who were prepared only to repel an assault from the sea, not from their rear. The 24th Division immediately turned north and headed toward Davao City, fighting in Davao City on the 3rd of May 1945. The first combat elements of the 24th Division entered Davao City against less opposition than had been expected. The Japanese had contented themselves with destroying the city as best they could before withdrawing inland. While it took just 15 days, despite severe heat and humidity and constant rain, with an entire division traveling 115 miles and seizing the last major Philippine city under Japanese control, the real battle for Mindanao had begun. Up to a point, 10th Corps had deliberately bypassed the main Japanese defenses, which they planned to turn to eliminate them. A chronicler for the 24th Division wrote, "The soldiers of the 24th Infantry considered the post-Davao operations to be the hardest, bitterest and most exhausting battle of the 10 island campaigns." In addition to the tenacious defense put up by the Japanese, another punishing aspect of the subsequent combat was the proliferous fields of abaca. To the foot soldiers fighting in the Davao province, the word abaca was synonymous with hell. Countless acres around Davao are covered with these thick-stemmed plants. 15 to 20 feet high, the plants grow as closely together as sugarcane, and their long, lush, green leaves are in a welter of green so dense that a strong man must fight with the whole weight of his body for each foot of progress. In the abaca fields, visibility was rarely more than 10 feet. No breeze ever reached through the gloomy expanse of green, and more men, American and Japanese, fell prostrate from the overpowering heat than bullets. The common way for scouts to locate an enemy position in abaca fighting was to advance until they received machine gun fire at a range of 3 to 5 yards. For the next 2 months, in such an environment, the 24th Division fought the Japanese, while the infantry sought out the Japanese defenses. Platoons and squads worked through the abaca and surrounding jungle to seek out enemy bunkers and spider holes. In this way, fighting progressed slowly, but the Americans were making headway. At Libby Aerodrome and the village of Mintal, some 5 miles west of Davao City, the 21st Infantry Regiment got assailed from 3 sides by a numerically stronger enemy. Individual acts of heroism often spelled the difference between victory and defeat in the desperate fighting. On the 14th of May, posthumous Medal of Honor awardee, PFC, James Diamond of D Company fell mortally wounded as he was leading a patrol to evacuate more casualties when came under heavy attack. He drew enemy fire while sprinting to an abandoned machine gun and was caught in a hail of bullets, but he allowed his patrol to reach safety. By the 17th of May, exhausted and bloodied, the 24th Division renewed its offensive, and this time, the 19th Infantry Regiment, supported by Fertig's guerrillas, blew open the Japanese eastern flanks before capturing the villages of Tacunian, Bula, Matino Biao, Magtuan and Mandug on the 29th of May. The Japanese 100th Division collapsed and retreated, but soon the fighting erupted into pursuit and mopping up operations against bypass Japanese pockets, which later claimed the life of the 19th Infantry's commander, Carl Thomas Jock Clifford, Jr. The fighting around the fringes of Davao City cost the 24th Infantry Division some 350 dead and 1,615 wounded, while the Japanese 100th Division suffered about 4,500 casualties. The end of the Japanese resistance. Meanwhile, the 31st Division had forged on Kibor town on Highway 1, some 40 miles away, since the 27th of April, with the 124th Infantry Regiment of Carl Edward M. Cullen at Point, where the first monsoon rains started creating havoc on the advance. Running into a Japanese battalion hurrying south, Lt. Col. Robert M. Fowler's 2nd Battalion with Battery B, 149th Field Artillery attached, engaged the Japanese with much-needed artillery fire, killing at least 50, and sending the rest fleeing. On the 3rd of May, the 31st Division reached Kibor, but not without worsening Japanese resistance. The town led to a supposed Japanese supply trail that twisted and turned south, until it reached the ocean-shore village of Talamo in Davao City. The treacherous terrain proved equally dangerous to both sides as they struggled in the ensuing battle for Talamo Trail on the 11th of May. About 1,000 Japanese held the trail, but jungle rainforest, torrential rains and abysmal trail conditions were the real factors. Airdropped supplies to the isolated infantrymen were common as the trail was impassable to motor vehicles. By the 30th of June, the 167th Infantry managed to move only 5 miles beyond the Pulingi River, even with the assistance of Filipino guerrillas. It lost 80 men and 180 wounded to the Japanese, whom they inflicted about 400 dead. On the 6th of May, the 124th Infantry Regiment continued to move up Sayre Highway without the Talamo Trail reconnaissance operation in full swing, and in doing so, it moved into its toughest fight of the Mindanao campaign. A Japanese battalion, ordered by Morozumi to delay the 124th at Maramag some 30 miles south to ensure the regrouping of his 30th Division, did with such ferocity that it took 6 days for the 124th to reach Maramag. The battle area from Talamo to Maramag was later renamed Colgan Woods by the troops in remembrance of Captain Thomas A. Colgan, an army chaplain who was killed during one of his repeated efforts to aid wounded soldiers in the line of fire. The battle was one of the many brutal struggles in the Pacific Theater that never made any headlines. Firing from dugout positions, from camouflaged spider holes with connecting tunnels, and from virtually invisible pillboxes, the defending Japanese chose to die in place rather than retreat. Banzai charges struck the 124th, fighting without supporting artillery, first on the 7th of May and then on the night of the 14th of May. The latter ended in a rout as American automatic weapons stopped the attackers, killing 73 Japanese, marking the end of the battle. In the fighting for Colgan Woods and Maramag, the 124th Infantry lost 60 men and 120 wounded from 6 to 12 May. The final stages of the Battle for Mindanao culminated with the 155th Infantry Regiment of Carl Monarchs J. Munkemar occupying Malaybalay on the 21st of May, and taking control of the Sayre Highway, together with the 108th Infantry Regiment of Carl Morris D. Strata after a steep fight with the Japanese. Morizumi's 30th Division continued their retreat up the Agusan Valley after a vicious encounter with the pursuing 31st Division on the 5th of June, where they eventually made it into the jungle. Farther south on Mindanao, smaller 10th Corps units seized Sarangani and Balut Islands, situated off its southern tip, and on the 12th of July, the 1st Battalion, 24th Division's 21st Infantry arrived at the northwest shore of Sarangani Bay to reinforce a reconnaissance patrol, which located a strong Japanese force in the interior, and proceeded to pursue the Japanese through the jungle. Japanese forces retreated into Klaja Karstlands in the municipality of Bayan, where they made their last stand against mixed American forces and Filipino guerrillas that were operating in the area. Operations in these areas continued until mid-August, when American planes heavily bombed the land, resulting in a large bloodbath of the Japanese. Some Japanese who have survived the bombings escaped to the forest, but were hunted down by the soldiers. The Japanese resistance in Mindanao was finally over. Aftermath. While mopping up operations by small American units and Filipino guerrillas continued for some time, Gen. Eichelberger announced the end of organized Japanese resistance. Throughout Mindanao, pockets of Japanese troops, safeguarded by the impenetrable terrain of the island's unexplored jungle expanses, survived until the end of the war, when some 22,250 troops and 11,900 civilians emerged to surrender. That well signaled the total liberation of the Philippines. Some 12,865 Japanese troops were killed, and another 8,235 appeared to have succumbed to starvation and disease. The Americans lost only 820 men and 2,880 wounded for the entire campaign. The seemingly low cost in battlefield casualties for the Americans in the Mindanao campaign stemmed, aside from the overall brilliance and skill of the 8th Army planners and leaders, from increasing assistance for Filipino guerrillas, which in military terms, constituted a valuable force multiplier for the 8th Army units. Before landings, guerrillas harassed Japanese units, provided valuable intelligence about Japanese dispositions and the relative suitability of landing beaches, and after each landing, the Filipinos fought alongside the Americans and pursued the Japanese throughout the island interiors.